I was in the office of my financial advisor the other day when I looked at her table and I said, "That's not a very good table. I can do something about that." So I've got my work cut out for me this week. This adventure is trying to make a 5-foot long cedar pieces into a 10-foot long cedar piece. She did a really good job at trying to do some budget work on creating a new desktop for herself. Not being a woodworker, she made a few fatal flaws that she wouldn't have known about. So stand to the rescue. We're going to try and get this all straightened out. A couple of big mistakes that she made. Number one is that she put a finish on the surface but never finished the bottom at all and never finished the ends at all. So the problem is that the wood dried unevenly. Being cedar, it does wick up moisture rapidly, so as the seasons changed, it buckled and warped pretty significantly. Another part of the problem is that the way that these boards were cut from the tree, we've got some pith in it. Yes, it's kind of pithy wood. And so we've got a lot of natural warpage going on. I think it's going to be a bit of a challenge to get everything flat and straight and maintain some semblance of thickness to this cedar. She kind of likes the epoxy river table stuff too, so all right, I might add a little bit of that in there too, even though it goes against my woodworking credo. It's plastic, not wood. Jessica used 2x10 cedar planks that were square 4 sides, sanded and preformed, and then jointed them with biscuit jointers. The first thing I had to do was take them back to their 2x10 form, cutting out the biscuit joints. Now, because a 2x10 won't fit on my 8-inch helical head jointer, I have to actually cut them further down the middle so that they will now be 2x5s. Because of all the cupping, if I would have left them full width and planed them until they were flat, the boards would have ended up probably about maybe 1.5 inches thick. So cutting them down to 2x5s allowed me to maintain some significant thickness for the table. So we're onto the jointer now, where I can remove some of the cupping that is remaining in the 2x5 boards. While I'm also here at the jointer, I'm going to square up an edge by putting it up on its face and making sure that we have one square edge. At this point in time, I'm getting a lot of boards, so I've got to start a numbering system to keep all 12 of the boards ready to go. We're also going to start planing for equal thickness. I stack the board so that the thickest one is on top, and it goes through first. So eventually, once I run all the boards through, they'll all be an equal thickness. So I'm going to try something I've never actually tried before. I always plane my boards on the flat side of a board, but because I'm changing a 2-section of 5-foot table into 1 section of 10 feet, I'm going to be interlacing these boards. So that means that they need to be the exact same width. So I know I could do that on my table saw, but I find that the saw blade doesn't leave the best surface for gluing joints. And I won't be able to run those not so great surfaces over the jointer because it'll change the width. So we're going to use the planer, not just as a thickness planer in this case, but as a width planer. So we now have 12 boards that are completely dimensionally square and completely dimensionally equal in width and thickness. We need to go over to the miter saw now to deal with the length. So 8 of the pieces are going to be full length. 4 of the pieces are going to be half full length. I'll describe that to you, why that is, in just a second here. So I've had an epiphany. I have now figured out how I'm going to make 2 5-foot tables into 1 10-foot table. And more importantly, how I'm going to actually construct this and build this 10-foot cedar slab table on my 5-foot workbench. There is going to be a joint in the middle of the table. So I cut these into 3 sections here. These 3 sections I'm going to glue together at once, and then I'm going to make another section identical to this and then glue those 2 sections together. So I'm going to take a couple of glue ups. All the joints, the butt joints in here, yeah, they're going to be butt joints. They're not going to be perfect, but considering the options, it'll be okay. At least they will be staggered butt joints. And how I achieved that is by using a 5-foot piece and a 5-foot piece and a 5-foot piece and a 5-foot piece, and sandwiched in between those 2 layers of 5-foot pieces, I used a 5-foot piece, then cut one of the 5-foot pieces in half, and there's the whole key to it. These 2 little sections are sandwiched between the 2 larger sections. I am going to use dominoes to joint these and level them because it won't go through my planer after. So I've got to do it right on the first shot. The domino jointer will help me with the alignment. Are you ready, baby? We got to cut 96 holes for this. Let's get to it. For those of you who don't know, domino joinery is the cat's ass Cadillac of woodworking. Cat's ass, I think I could say ass on YouTube. Anyways, it is really slick. It has saved us a lot of time, and in the case of this table, it saves me a lot of width. If I would have cut a traditional tongue and groove into the table, I probably would have lost an inch of width with this table. The biggest difference between the biscuit joiners and the domino joint is basically that the tenon is floating between 2 joints. It is a little bit stronger of a tenon because it's a little bit bigger than a biscuit, so it's able to align the 2 panels very cleanly. So the highly revered task of gluing one of the table halves together begins. Today we are using PVA glue, polyvinyl acetate, in the form of Titebond 3. The first task is to completely fill all of the holes that the dominoes are going to go into. Well, you don't completely fill them because you have to get all of the glue out by using this hydraulicking type process. All the glue comes spitting out after I hammer the dominoes into position. This ensures that there's good glue contact around all of the domino surface. You're assured of this when the glue comes squeaking out. Next step, we add a lot more glue to cover the dominoes and the one surface that is going to be bonded to the mating surface of the cedar panel. I make sure to spread the glue and get it everywhere. Good glue contact is very important on this job. Now the end grains are something special here too. They absorb glue very rapidly. So I use a lot of glue, sometimes putting a second coat on after the first is dried. Everything has been dry fit before now, so it should just plop right together. Like that, it did. I'm not using any clamps on the ends, so a little bit of hammering with my trusty plum wooden mallet that I built myself, I'll leave a video for you, should be enough to close up those gaps on the end grains. The last piece going into place, it should just clunk in just like that. Now PVA glue requires pressure to set, to activate it. I'm sure to use what we call cauls, or little wooden sticks that will prevent the clamps from squishing the soft cedar boards. And here it is finally all clamped up with all the clamps and all the pressure necessary. And that, my friends, is how you glue up a 10-foot table on a 5-foot workbench. Okay, let's not get too cocky here, Dan. That was only half the table. You gotta glue the 2 halves together now. Let's see how you handle this big mutt. Anyways, it was a fairly simple process of just installing more of the dominoes, aligning the 10-foot table on the bench now. This time I used the elevated platforms to assist with holding the clamps and the cauls in place. Once the glue up was completed and all done, you can see all the markings lined up just perfect. So, the epoxy river that we are now going to reluctantly put into the table, I thought if we're going to make a river table, let's make it in the shape of our local river. So I took out Google Maps and looked up what the Bulkley River looked like and drew it on the table. I then took my Festool jigsaw and ran it from one end to the other. So I took my big 10-foot slab of table that I just glued together and literally cut it in half. Oh, the things we do. The good thing about it, though, is that I ended up gaining some width to the table, which we desperately needed. What I'm doing here is using a hand router with a chamfer bit. And what I thought this would do would create just a little bit of what I would think of as a shoreline. Because the epoxy is going to be black, I wanted a little bit of a river's edge to show through. Now this is the bottom side of the table, so sealing it up to create a bond to the form is very, very important. The last thing you want to have happen at the stage of operations when you start pouring the epoxy resin is to have it come leaking out the bottom. So I've used the epoxy resin before in one of my other projects. I'll leave a link to that, or my bar drawer front project. And in that one, I built complete forms to totally encompass the wood pieces that were getting the epoxy applied. And this one, because the table is so massive, I am merely assembling a form and attaching it to the bottom of the table. Not only does this help in keeping the table flat, it'll get a good seal, or it will provide a good seal to the bottom of the table, because we're using 3/4 inch thick plywood here, covered in tuck tape. So I used plain wood screws and more screws. And then when I was done, I added some more screws because, like I say, I just do not want this thing to leak. That would be a catastrophe when you start pouring resin and it leaks out the bottom. If nothing, this is going to be entertaining. I got to flip over this 10-foot table by myself. Don't crash, don't crash, don't crash, don't crash. Whew. I did it. So while I was on Google Maps, I noticed that there were channel islands in our river. So this is my attempt at creating channel rivers. I just found some old pieces of cedar from the bin and kind of shaped them into what looked like little channel islands, which I will attach to the bottom of the forms. In my last video, I dispelled a few myths about resin, and I want to see if I can dispel another one. A lot of people say that you have to seal the edges, otherwise you get bubbles and popping and stuff like that. I'm not going to seal the edges. I want to see if it actually happens, because it won't matter if it happens in this bottom coat, because I'm going to cover it in a very opaque black anyways. So this is a bit of an experiment. The other thing you'll see that I've done is I have crazy glued pieces of wood to the bottom of the river as filler in the hopes of reducing the amount of resin that I actually need. I'm hoping to pass on as little cost to the customer as I can. All right, that's well mixed. Let's pour it and see what happens. Oh yeah, the other thing you'll see that I did, I put some thicker blocks because every river has little channel islands in it. So I wanted to recreate some channel islands. So they are sitting just proud of the top surface of the table, so that when I sand it down, they will actually stick out and be visible. How clever of me. Oh my. That was 2 liters of mixed resin. I'm not even halfway there. Oops, this is going to be a little bit more expensive than I thought it was. Sorry. Okay, here we go with what I hope is the last of the pour, because I've almost run out of epoxy. We've got like 3 liters in there already. Here's another 2. This is getting expensive. Here we go. Houston, I think I have a problem. We got 9 liters in here. That's a lot. That's a buttload of money. And it's still not full. I think I need another liter at least. I'm gonna go through and pop the bubbles and let this set up for a couple days. I'll go back to using expensive black walnut any day over this really expensive resin. It does look pretty cool though, I have to admit that. Oh, and just as an FYI update, all these bubbles that I'm popping are from actually the wood that was in the center. And mostly from me pouring it. It was bubbling as I was pouring it out of the can. So yeah, as far as sealing the wood goes, I don't think you gotta. No bubbles came out of the wood. Here we go with hopefully our last pour. 1/4 of an inch left to fill. And I like to leave this last fill to that much anyways. I built up my little dam on the river's edge because no matter how hard you try, you can never get these things perfectly level. And this being a liquid, it will self-level. So I got 1 liter in the bucket here. Let's go. "10 liters later, and I think we have it. Now I just got to find a way to flatten it. I found the best way to flatten both the epoxy and the cedar wood simultaneously was to use a power hand planer. It worked very well. I just had to be sure to make sure that I checked for levelness using a very large straight edge continuously. So if you'll remember, one of the reasons why we are in this predicament is because the bottom of the desk wasn't sealed. So it allowed the wood to dry and absorb moisture through the seasons unevenly, causing the boards to do that. So we're going to seal it. We're going to seal it with some bullseye shellac. We're slopping it on. Slop, 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 slop. Hey, here's something somebody might consider an interesting bit. Having a square end on here is boring, so I'm not going to do that. I've drawn a line 2 inches off the end here, and all I do is I basically take a ruler and bend it to where I want, and then right there in the center I just hold it, and I sneak this clamp up until all the lines just line up. So I've got the edge of the ruler lined up with that line, the edge of the ruler lined up with that line, and the ruler lined up with my mark in the middle. Take a pencil, mark it out. Et voila, a happy face. I'm happy. Here we go with the Mighty Festool jigsaw again. I'm not one to buy overly expensive tools, but this little jigsaw is worth its weight in gold. When it comes to the transition between the wood and epoxy, you have to change the amount of thrust of the blade, which you can do on the fly. If there's too little thrust, the blade actually gums up and turns the epoxy into glue, which just plugs everything up, makes a mess. Once you're through the epoxy, you can complete the cut using a finer stroke of the blade. We're getting down to the nitty-gritty now, and I'm putting a final rollover on the edge of the complete table just to take off the sharp edge. It's actually a fairly large 3/4 inch round over that I put all the way around the whole table. It adds a nice soft feel to the table. Hi, here I am for what I hope and pray to be the very last little bit of epoxy I have to put on this beast of a table. You'll see a couple little things. I'm basically filling some knots and voids, to be expected. What was unexpected was the cedar tend to sop up a little bit of the resin in the seams and turned it kind of black. Now there's not much that I can do other than, gouge it out, put some fake wood in there and try and make it match the cedar next to it. So I figured, if I can't beat them, why not join them? I'm going to groove out all the rest of the seams and fill it with a little bit of black epoxy, make it look like I meant to do it on purpose. I've got some very fast drying resin here, 24-hour epoxy, that has been tinted appropriately. The first thing I'm going to attempt is actually filling one of the little voids where the two cedar boards joined. I'm just going to put a very thin line and hopefully it will sop in and it'll look just like the other ones. And now for the most tedious task of the whole project, the sanding. On this particular project, we've got wood and epoxy involved here, so we work up through the grits all the way from taking out any of the imperfections at 100 grit and working all the way up to, in this case, I used a 400 grit on the epoxy. Now, sanding can be very tedious, so I like to have a little bit of fun. Crank the tunes in the shop and just spend a couple of days of sanding all the way up through the grit, and a lot of work. Giving it a final tack with the tech cloth, I've blown it off. It's all sanded to 320 grit. We're all ready to go to put some finish on it. The finish of choice today is Spar Marine Varnish. This one happens to be by Old Masters. The reason why I picked Spar Marine Varnish is because this is actually going to be a desk. The cedar is soft, and I'm hoping that the Spar Varnish, which has a little bit of plastic coating in it, will dry just a little bit harder to prevent those pens from leaving marks in the tabletop. Don't recommend cedar for a desktop, that's for sure. The other thing is we'll get exposed to some sun also, so Marine Spar Varnish is actually a good choice for that. Here we go with the ooh and the ah. Ooh. Ah. So Spar Varnish, you can apply it kind of thicker, but after you've actually applied it, you have to do what we call tipping it. So you can put it on, and then you got to angle your brush, and with very light strokes, get it as flat over the surface as you can using very, very light pressure. And that'll allow Spar Varnish to actually level out nicely. I'm going to put a full coat on, bring you in when I'm done. It's looking good. I like it. Between the coats of the Marine Spar Varnish, I sand it all by hand with 400 grit. This takes any of the dust nibs off that were from the previous coat. Give it a good thorough blow dry and a good wipe down, and you're ready to put on the next coat of Spar Varnish. In this case, a total of 4 coats altogether makes it all nice and shiny. It will dry to a satin finish. There you go. You got a blanket for a table.
I know, that's exciting.
Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Are you ready for this?
Yeah. Wow. That is so nice. That's so cool. That looks so good. I love how you did the rounding on the edges here too. Looks so good, Danny. Wow. I am so excited to be using this. I've got like goosebumps right now.